The problem is that Israel and the lobby and the far right inside the national security establishment in this country, in the United States, don't accept that. They think that Iran cannot have any enrichment capability.
So recently, Judge Napolitano had John Mearsheimer on his program, and the two talked about, among other things, whether the rift between Netanyahu and Trump is actually real. Is there anything to that? And also the shifting dynamics as it comes to Israel's war in Gaza, how long it could continue, and what is Trump's attitude toward it. So I can't wait to hear what he says. Let's watch and let's react, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Do you believe the Western press about the rift between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, or do you think this is some sort of a deception foisted upon us by either the White House or the Israelis?
I don't think there's a serious rift. I think there's no question that Trump wants to do a number of things in the Middle East that Netanyahu does not want him to do. But the question is whether Trump is willing to get tough enough with Netanyahu to create a real rift. And there's no evidence that's the case. And of course, the two issues here are, number one, Iran, where Trump wants to cut a deal and Netanyahu is basically making it impossible for him to cut a deal. And then, of course, the other issue is Gaza, where I believe that the Trump administration would like to put an end to what's going on in terms of the genocide in Gaza, but Netanyahu and the lobby won't let him.
Yeah, I think that's largely correct. On one hand, I don't think there's any tangible rift between U.S. and Israel or Trump and Netanyahu. Otherwise, you'd see calls to end the funding, and that's not going to happen. Trump is supported strongly by the Israel lobby. Miriam Adelson gave him $100 million for his campaign, and his cabinet is full of Zionists. So that's not happening. On the other hand, there is something possibly true or palpable to some of the things that he's done recently that makes me think that there might actually be something to this on some level. Not the highest level, which would require withdrawing aid, but Trump has made several decisions that are unilateral without Netanyahu's approval. The first one is the decision to stop bombing in Yemen, which Israel actually wanted because the Houthis were supporting aid to the Palestinians. And the other one was securing the release of that hostage, the American hostage, the last one that Hamas had, who actually happened to be an IDF soldier as well. So he is in an odd classification there. But both of those things Netanyahu didn't approve. So yeah, if Trump really has a schism with Netanyahu and he really wants to end what's happening in Gaza, he just has to withdraw that funding and, whip his loyal followers in Congress who basically will do anything he wants. It mostly seems like in terms of their voting. They're voting for, huge increases in government spending when they spent the whole last 4 years complaining about government spending, but that's what Republicans do. So mostly agree with Mearsheimer here.
Steve Witkoff, Trump's negotiator, who Max Blumenthal says has been described by the Iranian negotiators as ill-informed and distracted. Maybe his mind is on Ukraine. I don't know. Nevertheless, told ABC News last weekend that Trump is a humanitarian. Isn't that laughable?
It's laughable. I mean, you make much on the show regarding the question of whether the war in Ukraine is now Trump's war. I would argue the same question can be applied to the genocide in Gaza. And as I've said before, I believe that Trump not only owns the war in Ukraine now, he owns the genocide in Gaza as well. And to argue that he's a humanitarian is preposterous.
Yeah, hard to disagree there. I mean, Trump has showed a propensity to be more non-interventionist than some of his predecessors, some of the hardest core neocons, and even Joe Biden. But he's nowhere near what libertarians would love out of a Ron Paul or Dennis Kucinich or someone that's a true non-interventionist. And Donald Trump is Israel first in many regards. He would not have told Netanyahu in the White House what he told Zelensky when he said, you're gambling with millions of lives here. He certainly wouldn't. He believes that it's a different dynamic there. and no funding is going to be cut there.
Secretary General, or the Undersecretary General of the UN for Humanitarian and Relief Affairs, Tom Fletcher, said earlier this week that 14,000 Gazan babies would die of starvation or malnutrition by the end of this week, which is today or tomorrow. Today, as we're taping this, is Thursday. Ray McGovern reports that 5 aid trucks, the Israelis allowed 5 aid trucks in, 3 carrying food, 2 carrying shrouds. Our friend Aaron Mate cites sources on the ground that 5 aid trucks is the equivalent of 4 little crackers per person in Gaza. So it's clear that the Israelis, Smotrich, Gavir, and some nut job that will run for you in a minute, are in favor of the starvation of children and are using it as a weapon with which to conquer Gaza.
I would just say to you, it's not just these particular leaders who support this policy in the side of Israel. You don't see hardly any protests among the Israeli public regarding this genocidal policy. It's truly shocking. And when you look at what the Western elites are doing, they're hardly doing anything to prevent it. It's just truly amazing. It's sickening. I don't know what else to say. I didn't think anything like this would ever happen, but it is happening.
All right, to turn your stomach a little bit, this is a former member of the Knesset and former member of Prime Minister Netanyahu's party, Chris Cutt, number 10.
Every child in Gaza is the enemy. We are at war with the Gazan entity, the Gazan terror entity, which we ourselves established in Gaza, in Oslo, and in the disengagement. The disengagement that Prime Minister Netanyahu voted in favor of, that is the enemy now. Every such child to whom you are now giving milk, in another 15 years will rape your daughters and slaughter your children. We need to conquer Gaza and settle it. And not a single Gazan child should remain there. Let's stop telling ourselves this deception just to score points in this game between pro-Bibi and anti-Bibi. This isn't about left or right, it's about winning this war, and it's about justice. When will we learn? When will we learn?
It's just crazy, but when you think of it, it's just insane because that's indistinguishable from what some U.S. politicians in Congress have said about Gazans, that there's no such thing as an innocent Gazan. That's what actually Brian Mast said a few years ago. It's something that Candace Owens criticized them for, and that's what started much of her rift with Shapiro, so it seems. What they're doing is absolutely criminal. It is depriving people of nourishment, and they've been doing it since 2007. This blockade has stopped people from being able to sustain their livelihood. These are not members of Hamas. This is absolutely criminal, and to be associated with this is absolutely revolting. But not just association, to cheer it on is even more revolting. It's absolutely lunatic stuff, and I can't believe it. You know, Douglas Murray made a big deal in his debate with Dave Smith on Joe Rogan about how, well, they only had the blockade to stop bomb materials from coming in. But no, their blockade was stopping food from coming in, flour, and things that people need to live. This is absolutely insane.
You're saying that this attitude is prevalent amongst the Israeli public.
I think that that's exactly right. I don't see any evidence that there's an uprising in the Israeli public against the genocide. There are lots of protests in Israel, but those protests have to deal with the hostages and relations between the IDF and the government, but they don't have to do with stopping the genocide. I mean, you want to file all of this under the Nazification of Israel. That's where it should be filed. This is a country that's gone completely off the rails. And the more that you see it in operation, the more it looks like the Germans under Hitler. This is just hard to believe. We're talking about eradicating all of the Palestinians in Gaza, murdering them. This is hard to believe. This is the sort of things that the Germans did. It's supposed to be never again. I don't see any evidence that people in Israel believe in the principle of never again. certainly when it applies to the Palestinians. And people in the West are hardly lifting a finger. This is a categorically reprehensible situation.
Yeah, he said it. It's just sad and so disheartening in so many ways. It's really hard to put this into words. And the saddest thing about this is people will look at that video, and people that criticize it, like Mearsheimer and Napolitano and Mattei and Blumenthal and Dave Smith and Glenn Greenwald and some of Israel's biggest critics in the United States, and they'll say, well, they're just being anti-Semitic. That's what their response will be, just to bring this up. But what's more anti-Semitic than to say that that's the natural policy that has to belong to the Israeli state? If I was an Israeli, I would not want to be complicit with that in any regard. And while I mostly agree with Mearsheimer when it comes to there's not that much opposition to the war in Gaza, there is some within Israel. Some of the media outlets actually are fairly critical of him, and were very critical of him in the corruption charges against him leading up to October 7th. It's probably what actually saved Netanyahu's political career. But outlets like Haaretz and some others are actually relatively critical to Likud, if not Netanyahu himself.
Steve Witkoff, of whom we spoke a few minutes ago, after his first negotiation with the Iranians, left them with the impression that a significant amount of enriched uranium would be in the deal, and they were surprised and ecstatic. And then, of course, he moved the goalposts and now reduced that number down to 0. Where are they going to go with these negotiations? Whether he's distracted, whether he's ill-informed, he's now taking orders from the Zionists around Trump, of which he's one, and moved the goalposts. Never mind the 3.2, it's now 0.
Yeah, I mean, I think Witkoff initially allowed, in his initial statements, he allowed for Iran to have an enrichment capability, because Witkoff, who is a smart man, understands that that's the only way you're going to get a deal. The problem is that Israel and the lobby and the far right inside the national security establishment in this country, in the United States, don't accept that. They think that Iran cannot have any enrichment capability. And the lobby, of course, is enormously powerful. And the message was sent to Trump as well as to Witkoff that that Iran could not have nuclear enrichment. And he was forced to do a 180-degree turn, which he has done. And what that means is you're not going to get an agreement if we stick to that position, if Witkoff sticks to that position, because Iran has insisted that it has to be able to keep some enrichment capability.
The American who negotiated directly with Hamas for the release of the IDF young man from New Jersey, the young man's name is Eden Alexander. I forget the American's name. His first name is Adam, not Hochstein. It's another Adam. Said, when was being criticized by the Netanyahu regime, we don't need Israel's permission to engage in any negotiations. And then he was silenced. The negotiations succeeded. The boy is free. They had an opportunity to free him in March. Netanyahu blocked it. This one freed in May, couldn't block. But this fellow who did the negotiation, not Witkoff, was silenced.
Yeah, Witkoff actually played what is seen to be the major role in securing that release, by the way. And not only that, Witkoff was involved in a hostage negotiation deal that saved 20 additional hostages weeks ago. I forget exactly how long ago. But Witkoff is wearing many hats right now. I think he's Trump's most non-interventionist diplomat when it comes to Ukraine. It's certainly not Keith Kellogg, and it's certainly not Marco Rubio. And, you know, he's taking an important role in both theaters, in both Israel and Ukraine. It's true he's a Zionist, but he's probably Trump's most talented diplomat, and he's probably his most non-interventionist diplomat. So I give him credit. Adam Boehler was great too, and I think Boehler has been deployed on a mission to secure hostages being released as well. But Witkoff's an interesting guy, and if he is distracted, I can see why. He's been involved in a lot of things in two different major theaters of war from a U.S. standpoint.
I'm going to guess you're not surprised.
No, of course not. Uh, by the way, there's stories in the media that Witkoff got that person released. Witkoff
Yeah.
played the key role in getting that Israeli American released. But the quid pro quo was that Witkoff had promised Hamas that it would produce a ceasefire. And that's why Hamas released this Israeli American prisoner. And of course, once he was released, the Israelis and the Americans welched on the deal.
Yeah, no doubt. As far as the schism between Trump and Netanyahu, I think there's something there, but it's only a few layers of the onion. It's not the whole thing. Obviously, Trump's not going to go to Congress and demand a halt to aid to Israel. He greenlit the resumption of fighting after a ceasefire that he engineered. He was the architect of that ceasefire immediately as he came into office, and he would have had to greenlight the continuation of war, and Netanyahu never really stood on the ground that, hey, I'm going to let the ceasefire continue as a roadmap to peace. He just wanted to do it temporarily, get some hostages out of there, and continue bombing Gaza, which he has continued to do, and there's thousands of innocents that have died because of it. I think October 7th killed, about 1,000 people? 1,000 innocent people, and that's horrific. It's horrendous, it's barbaric in every way, but then Israel's war in Gaza has killed something like, you see lots of projections out there, but it might be somewhere between, 40 to 80,000 people. I think I've seen projections as high as 100,000. They cleaned Rafah out. So it's horrific. One thing I do want to touch on is he said that Netanyahu has been, a staunch opponent to Trump's willingness to get a deal done with Iran to limit their nuclear capabilities. But actually, I don't think it's their nuclear capabilities that they're particularly concerned about. Ostensibly, yes, but Iran just wants regime change, or Israel just wants a regime change in Iran. And they've said as much. Netanyahu has publicly said he wants the Libyan model to apply to Iran. Well, what was that? Gaddafi got murdered in an interventionist, warfare scheme by the U.S. and by NATO. It was an offensive scheme showing, of course, that NATO is not a defensive alliance, certainly not in its modern application. And that is what Netanyahu's been talking about for decades. Likud and Netanyahu want regime change there. If you take that off the table, a deal between Trump and the Iranians to halt their nuclear capabilities and their nuclear programs, it takes the pretext, the justification they need to sell war propaganda for a regime change operation. That's why they fear this deal very much. That's why, Netanyahu seems to be pushed away to an extent on it, because apparently Trump felt manipulated by Netanyahu. Hate to tell him, that's the whole role of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, is for Israel to manipulate the U.S. president and the U.S. deep state into Middle Eastern wars. That's been the last few decades. That's almost been my entire life, by the way. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think the rift between Netanyahu and Trump is legitimate and serious? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll check you in the next one.